Hello everyone, my name is UnsungNPC and I have one question for you. Do you like magic? Because today we're going to be talking about spellcasters, as you can see here. So the thing about this video is that this is video for DC casters. Support, healing, buffing, debuffing, okay? AoEs, right? Anything that uses your DC, your casting stat, instead of shooting spells at people. Shooting spells will be in the ranged attack video that is also posted, because that's more of a dex-based build rather than whatever casting stat you're using. So, one of the things we're looking at here first is race. The great thing about casters is I feel like casters are the best for being able to be whatever race you want, honestly. There are races that get bonuses to intelligence or charisma or wisdom, but really you can do so many things with casters, and some casters even having multiple casting stats can be a good thing. So really mix it up, play it the way you want to. I think there's a lot of fun, creative opportunity here, and honestly, being a buffer, debuffer, DC caster is one of my favorite ways of playing this game. For classes, if you want, good buffing and debuffing, clerics are always solid buffers. All right, they're so good. Druids as well. Druids can be great buffers, really excellent debuffers as well. And let's see. And wizards can do anything magic. Anything magic you want, wizards can do it. Sorcerers are great. I think they're even better as like ranged attack magic users, but there are definitely some sorcerer builds that are great for DC casters. So look into that as well. Anything else? I don't really see what you could do. I mean, if you want to be the healing alchemist, then that's your buffer right there. They still use bombs, so you can still kind of do like a dex build there. But if you want to be a healing alchemist, that's also a way. And then, how could I forget bards? Bards, I think bards are better if they're paired with some sort of combatness with your character, especially if it's like ranged combat or dex sword fighting. But if you want to make a DC bard or just a spell bard or a buffing bard or what have you, you can totally do that. Thundercaller can also be a great debuffing or like AoE type bard. Just being able to call lightning down is insane. So that's another great option. But today we're going to go into wizard just for the sake of being able to look at what we can do here. Okay. Now first we're going to talk about the different schools of magic, because no matter what caster you are, different schools of magic do different things. Okay, and every magic user has access to the different schools. Wizards can focus on school specialization, and so can sorcerers a little bit as well, and bards. There's a couple of bards that you should do. Clerics, you're not really focusing on school specialization as much as you are focusing on just either buffing or debuffing or anything, or maybe necromancy, because that's a school they have lots of access to. But let's take a look at here, right? So abjuration is going to be some buffs, some defensive things like shield, mage armor, stuff like that. Is actually, mage armor might not be abjuration. Mage armor might be conjuration. I'm not sure, but abjuration is typically like you have a force field and you're using it to your advantage in some way, right? Conjuration has two modes. One mode is summoning hordes of monsters, and I think it's honestly really fun to play, especially if you are want to take advantage of having a bigger party or anything like that during combat. just getting to summon mobs and mobs and mobs of monsters and creatures at your enemy is awesome for building your own front line if you don't want to have one of your own. The other mode of Conjuration is big AoE. Okay, there are a few spells out there like Stinking Cloud, Cloud Kill, there's different pit spells, lots of spells that are like AoEs that suck in the enemies or disable the enemies in some kind of way. Very, very powerful as well. Divination. Divination has to do with like foresight and things like that. So Divination's not as heavy on the arcane side as it is on the divine side, but there are still some divination spells that you can point out that we will take a look at. An example of that would be True Strike. Your very typical first level spell. True Strike is a great one if you're trying to like nail a hit. Divination is pretty great for melee or ranged users that also want to use spells on top. So that's what I think Divination's great for. Enchantment, the Bards' #1 weapon in their arsenal. And also Wizards and Sorcerers if you go that route. Enchantment. You want to brainwash someone, dominate someone, make an enemy hurt another enemy. You want to make someone cry for the whole combat. You want to make someone... You want to make your friends rage the entire combat. Enchantment is the spell group for you. Because this school messes with your mind. It's awesome. There's lots of disabling and debuffing involved with enchantment. It's lots of crowd control ability here. It's a very useful school if you want to build around that. Evocation, that's attacking. Evocation is either going to be your ranged attack spells or your big AoE damage spells. Evocation is damage, damage, damage. And also Magic Missile, which is a fantastic spell to use in your time of need, especially since it scales as you level up. So Magic Missile is the one first level spell that will never go out of style. Illusion. Illusion can be great for debuffing, but it's also great for getting you and your team out of situations and for buffing. Things like Magic Mirror. Wait, Mirror Image, not Magic Mirror. Mirror Image, and spells like that where it's making you harder to hit. Invisibility is illusion magic. All of that kind of stuff, great. If you really want to dive into that, gnomes are especially good at illusion magic, so look into that. Necromancy, my all-time favorite school of magic is Necromancy. Necromancy also has 2 modes. There's some animate dead options here. Okay, the reanimation of dead. Get some skellies on your team, right? But just the amount of debuffing you can do with Necromancy is insane. Making people run away in fear. Alright, making people exhausted. Making people drained of their life. Necromancy is so useful, and there's also some high damage spells in there as well for it, so it's very versatile. Very popular in the realm of divination, of divine magic, like clerics. Transmutation, probably the best buffing school that there is. Okay, transmutation is turning yourself into animals, turning yourself into dragons, making yourself huge and powerful. Okay, transmutation is great if you want to take your frontline fighters and make them ginormous and powerful and so strong. And it's just a great tool to have. There's, spells in there to make animals more powerful. There's spells in there to turn you into an animal or dragon, like I said, or an elemental. So many things you can do. It's very fun to play around with. I don't know if it's the best one in my opinion, but I think it's very fun to play. So I have fun with that. Necromancy, Transmutation, Enchantment, and Conjuration, I think, are the best paths if you want to completely build into those magics. Evocation, like I said, if you're trying to focus on damage dealing, great. For DC Wizards, the AoE damage spells are great, but I think there's way more ranged attack options for Evocation, so I would go with that route. But like I said, do what you want to do. Illusion and Divination and Abjuration are great on top of other things. They're very hard to focus in, but if you make a way to do it, I would love to hear about it, because I would love to have an illusion build that just works perfectly within itself. I think that's a very cool school to play, and then, well, I don't think there are enough spells in this game for it. I think it would be awesome if someone came up with a build for it, because it's great. But like I said, I mean, that's kind of like, you could do like an illusion rogue and get some good sneak attacks in there. I don't know how else I would use it though. So let me know. Okay, so we're gonna get through here. Skills. All right, for stats. Stats and skills. Your main stat when making a DC buffing, debuffing support wizard or any other caster is to pump stats into your casting stat, okay? For wizards, that's intelligence. For bards and sorcerers, that's charisma. For clerics and druids, that is wisdom. And then for clerics, I would also take charisma for your channel energy ability, and for bards, I would also take intelligence, because you need to take advantage of all the knowledge they can get, right? All the skills. So that's what I would do for those. Pumping those is awesome. I don't like to min-max too hard. I mean, I like to have one stat that's like really high, and like maybe one stat that dips into the negative, if any. But I like a more well-rounded character. So it's kind of figuring out the balance for how you want to play. I think there's plenty of items that raise your stats in the game enough to where you don't necessarily need to just completely min-max. If you like min-maxing and optimized builds, cool for you. Do it. If you want to dump a stat, I suggest dumping strength, because who needs it when you're a caster if you're not a fighting caster? But other than that, I think casters are really, like, you know, you're focusing on those mental stats. But another thing to note, dexterity and constitution are also somewhat important still, because dexterity affects your initiative. And for DC casters and buffers and debuffers, if you're wanting to do any of that in combat, that is important if you want to go first. I think that's how, especially with crowd control characters, going first is imperative to success. So dexterity for initiative and AC is great. Constitution is great for those. Constitution is great for those checks when you're trying to, like, you know, you're maintaining concentration, or you're fighting in the thick of it with spells, trying to cast next to people with swords, anything like that. It's also good to stack some health, because casters are already so low health characters. I don't think I've ever made a character that had less than 12 or 14 con, no matter what they do. I think con's just a great skill, or a great stat to have. Casters are not going to get increased fortitude the same way that a fighter would, so it also helps with your fortitude saving throw. So constitution's still useful, but like I said, your casting stat's going to be your main thing here. In terms of skills, it just depends on what kind of character you want to be. I think if you're an arcane caster and you don't have knowledge arcana, you're missing out. I think knowledge arcana is just so important, and it's how you identify magical items, which is huge. I've had a playthrough where I had one person with arcana, and they were always at the town, and I didn't bring them with me anywhere, so I could never identify items on the go, and that was a regrettable decision that I rectified right away, because I was like, this is killing me. I need to know what these items are. Arcana's great. All of the knowledge and lore skills are great for casters to choose, especially with regarding to the type of casting. So if you're a cleric, having religion; if you're a druid, having nature, things like that works out really well with the synergy between those. Perception's also a great one, especially if you're a cleric or druid, just because someone needs to have perception on your team, and it being casters can be a great tool to have, especially since more combat characters don't get as many skill points. And then if you're a caster that's an arcane caster, use magic device is great for using wands and scrolls if you're into those, especially if you want to be a scroll savant, which seems like it, you know, takes away some wizard bonus feats, but I'm telling you, being able to use your own caster level for scrolls instead of the actual scrolls caster level is a great way to take some of those lower level scrolls and actually make them useful. So scroll savants are awesome. I know there's a companion in Wrath of the Righteous that's a scroll savant. I think they're great. So use magic device can also be a great skill there for your casting characters, especially for bards or sorcerers, because it's a charisma based skill and they pump charisma for their spell casting anyway, so you can kind of find a synergy there and just like, why not take it, right? All right, feats. Now, there seems to be a lot of spellcasting feats with all the meta magic stuff, but really, I mean, for spellcasting, there really aren't that many feats to pick from, and there are some key ones that you can pick for the type of spellcasting that you want to do. Okay, so first of all, you need to identify the kind of school that you really want to focus in. I wouldn't do spell focus for more than 2 schools, just because eventually you're spreading yourself thin. But if you really want to be a jack of all trades, a great at a lot, but a master of none, then heck, man, like, spell focus all the way. Take spell focus for everything. Get those DCs up. For those of you that don't know, the DC is the difficulty class. So the DC, the higher the DC of your spell is, the harder it is for enemies to save against those spells. So they'll more likely be affected. So spell focus is a must. I would just take it at character creation, especially if you know what kind of magic you want to do. Combat casting, for a DC or a buffer or a debuffer, I wouldn't worry about combat casting. It helps with concentration checks, but really it's for those casters like mages where you're sword fighting and casting at the same time. So I wouldn't worry about it. If you're doing evocation and you want to do AoE or ranged attack at all, elemental focus is awesome because it adds +1 to the difficulty class for any of those elemental spells that deal damage, and I think that's like super useful. I've made an ice witch build before, and I had elemental focus and greater elemental focus, and my ice spells were just top. Like cold spells were just unbeatable. So that's a great one to have. If you feel like you don't want to spend points in con, then you could just try and do great fortitude and just increase your fortitude saving throws that way if you find that you have the extra feats to do that. Improved initiative, great feat for DC casters or buffing and debuffing that happens in combat, because that +4 to initiative is going to really ensure that you are at the top of the initiative rolls and you're at the top of the combat, order, so that you can go first. I think that's a great way to get that going. We'll get to the meta magic feats here in a sec. Spell penetration. If you are doing debuffing or DC spells against other people and you're not a buffer, spell penetration is great. There are some enemies in this game that have like good spell defense against spell attacks. Like your spell will just fail because you can't even get against their spell resistance. And I think that spell penetration and then greater spell penetration is a great way to get around that. So I would definitely take a look at that. Toughness, if you want the extra health. If you're just find yourself in the back line so much that you don't really get hit at all, then that's fine too. If you're a summoner, augmented and then superior summoning are awesome. You have to take spell focus conjuration first, but getting the +4 bonus to strength and constitution for your summoned creatures is amazing. And then if we go down to superior summoning, all right, superior summoning, just adding 1 more creature to the total numbers of creatures, like that's insane. That can be a real game changer if you're building a summoning character. I would definitely recommend those for sure. Spell specialization is great. If you're a DC user or a ranged attack spellcaster, I think spell specialization is fantastic, especially if you have like that one or two go-to spells that you're just like, I'm using this all the time. Like I know people love Stinking Cloud, for example. If you're using Stinking Cloud all the time, just take spell specialization and just increase the bump on the ability of that spell. And then there's greater spell specialization on top of that. There's also greater spell focus, greater elemental focus, and greater spell pen. All of those graders are also great to take and stack on top of the feats you've already chosen. So those are all the ones that I would suggest. If you're a caster that has powers, like a Bard's Performance, a Cleric's Channel Energy, a Druid's like Shape-Shifting or Animal Companion or anything like that, I would definitely take the feats related to those abilities. Extra Performance and Lingering Performance for Bards are great. Lingering Performance can totally save you some round usage of your Bardic performances, because you only have a certain number of rounds per day you can use those, and Lingering makes it to where it lasts a little bit longer, which is awesome. So you can stop it early if the combat's coming to a close. Extra Channel is a great one to do. Selective Channel is very important, because if you don't do that, you're going to be healing everyone, including the enemy, and that's not what we want here. So Selective Channel is a must. If you're making a cleric at character creation, I would just take Selective Channel, to be honest. But yeah, those extra ones, Lingering Performance, like I said, it continues for 2 rounds after. So that's 2 extra rounds that you don't have to pay for, essentially, which is fantastic. For Druids and their Animal Companions, no, Boon Companion's more for Rangers, not Druids, so we wouldn't worry about that. If you really want to wear some armor, you can do Arcane Armor Mastery. There's some really good robes in this game, though, so I wouldn't recommend it. I think there's, like, a robe that benefits every type of spell casting in some way. I don't know if there's probably not, like, Abjuration or Illusion robes, but there's definitely robes for enchantment, capes for enchantment. There's robes for necromancy. There's robes for elemental spells. You know, robes are great. I wouldn't worry about armor at all if you were doing a spellcaster, if I were you. But if you really want a heavy armored spellcaster, frick, man, go for it. Like, take that Arcane Armor Mastery and decrease your chances of failing spells, for sure. Arcane Armor Training before that, obviously, reduces the spell failure by 10%. Very useful. Another thing is, like, if you find that you have more feats and don't know what else to put them in, like, stuff like skill focuses are great, especially if you're a bard or a wizard, because of the intelligence bump. Like, you have all those skill points and skills that you can master in, and skill focus is a great way to, like, stick with the skill that you really want to pump up, especially if it's like Knowledge Arcana or something like that, because it's kind of like a curve, but late game there are some very difficult checks that come into play, and being able to knock those out is awesome. If you have multiple spellcasters in your team, Allied Spellcaster is pretty great. I think it works better for like fighting spellcasters like mages and stuff, but if you want to add that in there, nothing wrong with that either. But yeah, so like I said, any extra feats you have, putting it into fortitude feats or putting it into something where you're increasing your ability to use certain skills or toughness or something like that, great little feats to pick up if you run out of ideas. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is for classing. So wizards are probably the more versatile spellcasters. The amount of stuff they can do is crazy. They do have to focus in schools, especially like Thessalonian specialists. You don't even use other schools, but you get some special powers for your school that are really cool. Sorcerers, they get bloodline powers, right? So for sorcerers, there's so many different bloodlines you can do, and it can really change the game on like what type of spells you use. For example, if you're an undead bloodline, you're gonna want those necromancy spells, right? Because you're already getting some, and then getting The Necromancy spell focus, greater spell focus is going to be useful. Any of the dragons or elemental ones are great for the different evocation spells. Very good there. Fae is great for enchantment. Infernal is also great for some enchantment and some fire. Serpentine. There's some Conjuration here and also some Transmutation. So using either one of those could be good. Using them in combination is also fine. For Celestial, it's a lot more... There's a lot of buffing stuff. There's some summoning, but this is like kind of being like a wisdom sorcerer. Arcane is kind of like being an intelligent sorcerer. There's some just good utility wizard spells that are available, and you get some like school power stuff going on. So those are pretty great as well. Abyssal is awesome if you want to make like a strength-based sorcerer, like having good strength, having good charisma, because it's like you get these like bonuses to your strength. You get transformation as a spell, being able to transform. You get wings. Like you can make a really good melee fighter frontline with a abyssal bloodline sorcerer. So those are also pretty fun. And then Conjuration to just add some people to your team if you are in there. But like, I mean, Demonic Might and then Strength of the Abyss, Transformation, those are so powerful, really. And then you get Claws, which is cool too. So that's a really cool build for that. If you're interested in a Strength and Charisma combo, my Strength-based build video that's out has some good ideas for what you can do based on either tanking or two-handed fighting, or Claws. Works for Claws as well. But being able to... there are some feats that let you fear people as you use your Strength and Intimidation. And that's a cool combination to play in. So you can check that out. And there's some great tips in there for that. So, I don't know, for this one, we'll just say combat casting, whatever. Meta magic. Here's what I wanted to get into, because meta magic is a very useful tool and sometimes overlooked. I have made lots of casters for this game and have never used meta magic because I tend to just go for something a little more simple, and meta magic is a little more complicated to figure out, and like figuring out the best way to do it. And they take up feats to do them as well, right? So I'd only do them one or two if I had the extra feat movement here, but if you really want to focus on these meta magic, especially for sorcerers and wizards, meta magic is great because they're the more versatile casters. So I think there's a lot that you can focus in on here. Meta magic for empowering. All variable numeric effects of an empowered spell are increased by half, including bonuses to those rolls. So you're kind of doing a level increase. There's a level increase. So if you use a meta magic feat, they all have level increases. There's 2, 1, 4, 1, 3, right? And that means that you have to be able to cast a spell at that level increase to be able to use it. So this is great to start using when you have more lower level spells than what you can actually do, and start using meta magic feats on those lower level spells first. So empowering, all variable numeric effects. Empowered. Extended extends the duration of the spell, so twice as long. Heightened has a higher spell level than normal. Heightened spell actually increases the effective level of the spell that it modifies, so all effects dependent on spell level, DCs, ability to penetrate, stuff like that, are calculated according to the heightened level. So it's increasing the level of the spell, but for your benefit. Maximizing. All variable numeric effects are maximized, so saving... So maximize gains the spell's set benefits for each feat. Okay, so yeah. So it's kind of like empowered, but a little bit stronger, which is why the spell level increase instead of 2 is 3. Quicken, like it says, makes the spell a swift action, which is pretty powerful if you have other things you can do. Like if you're a melee sorcerer and you want to attack, you can like use the spell as a swift action and then psh, psh. So quicken spell is really great for those melee or ranged fighting casters. And then reach increases the range, so you can go from touch to close, close to medium, medium to long. It just increases it up one category, essentially. So those are what the meta magic do. You can really play around with that and find out what works best for you. I like Empower and Maximize for just your basic DC casters. For transmuters and buffers, I think Extend Spell is pretty cool. For fighting casters, Quicken Spell is great. For ranged attack users, I think, or ranged attack users, or like Evocation spell users in general, Reach Spell is pretty cool. And then Heighten Spell and Extend Spell, or Empower and Maximize, can also all be used for debuffing. I think those would be powerful for those as well. So those are just my tidbits on being a spellcaster. Now we're going to go look at some spells here. So these are like the standard arcane spells that you start with, whether you're a sorcerer or a wizard. And it'll tell you the school beneath them. And when you look at the spell, you have all of the information here. So you have the duration, 1 minute per level, not affected by spell resistance, casting time, standard action, right? So you can take a look at those and find out what's going to work best for you. The reason here it's not recommending Cause Fear, because in the Abyssal Bloodline you will get Cause Fear later down the road. So if you're picking a caster with powers, make sure that you're aware of what spells the powers will grant you, because you don't want to accidentally take those spells early, if you're going to get them anyway. So you don't want to double up on spells when you can get spells here that you don't have. So like this one has a save, reflex negates. So that means they're going to be using their reflex saving throw. So spells that have saving throws to negate them are going to be reflex, fortitude, or will. And figuring out, which is going to be each character and enemy is going to have a weak point in one of those three. So finding the weakest one and using that to debilitate them is a great way to play the game. For example, Fae have really low fortitudes, so I always focus on necromancy spells that affect fortitude, and you can really mess the Fae up with that. And so I think that is a good rule to follow when you're trying to, which is another reason why the knowledge shields come in handy, because you use knowledge world, knowledge nature, knowledge arcana to inspect creatures that you're fighting and gain the information about their stats. So if you have those high knowledge rolls, you can really figure out what is going to be the spell that's going to be able to be effective against them. Is it reflex? Is it fortitude? Is it will? So that's something to take into consideration when looking at that. The only other thing I would mention here is when you have a wizard, you start out with a lot of spells. You don't gain that many spells every time, but you start out with a lot. And so, magic, empower, evocation. Okay. So you start out with 6 spells, and it's going to recommend your school and put thumbs down on your 2 opposition schools. Opposition schools will take more spell slots to use. So if I wanted to put shield in my book, I'd have to pay 2 spell slots to do it, which is a waste. And then True Strike I would get for free. It would be an extra spell slot for your school, that where you can put a spell that goes with that school in there, and it doesn't take up one of your normal spell slots, which is awesome. So that's one of the things to think about when creating a wizard character where you have schools of magic. The other ones, you don't really focus on schools. It's just wizards that do that, so you don't really have to pay attention to it too much. But that's what I would recommend for that. So that's pretty much all there is to casters. Really, it's they give you kind of like the minimal tools and like, here you go, here's increases to your DC, to your elemental stuff, here's some meta magic tools, use them as you want to, which is why I think casters are so fun to play, because you are just able to like do whatever you want and really be creative with it. And so I think that spellcasters are just unbeatable in terms of creativity, versatility, really being able to have fun. I find them the most fun to play. So if you're finding the old hack and slash or sword and board character to be a bit boring, which I often do, and you can't find a way to make it fun, I suggest playing a caster for a different change of pace, because it is a blast. And that's all for today's video. So for those of you that are new to Pathfinder Kingmaker and the Pathfinder series in general, welcome. Keep looking at what Owlcat Games is doing, because they're really making waves with this game and with the upcoming Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous game coming out. And if you are a veteran player or a tabletop player of Pathfinder, I hope this gives you some fresh perspective in terms of what this game can do, what this game can be, and just how to have fun with it. Because, you know, making optimized builds and really dumping and pumping stats can be fun and entertaining sometimes, but I feel like there's so many creative things you can do, so many builds you can make, so many races and classes combinations, that there's a lot of fun to explore here. And I hope that you have fun exploring all the different things you can do. So I will see you guys next time. If you're interested in strength-based, dex-based, or ranged attacking characters, check out my other videos. If you're still wanting to learn about the basics and mechanics of this game, there's a video for that as well. And keep a lookout for any upcoming videos about the different classes specifically, because I will be releasing those within the next week. See you guys next time.